Postmodernism. It's one of the most talked about movements in literary history, especially on YouTube. But it may already be dead. So why should you learn about it, and why should you even read it? Because understanding what postmodernism was and what killed it is going to tell you a lot about what's being written now and why some of your favorite contemporary authors make the choices they do. We'll take a look at 6 easy novels to help us learn more about what makes postmodernism. And toward the end, we'll come back to its death and what seems to come next. Also, stay tuned at the very, very end, and I'll display a reminder of a few key points of postmodernism. You can also use this list of books for a good entry point into reading postmodern fiction, which is one of my favorite eras of fiction. The opening step to postmodernism comes down to 2 organizing questions. First, we'll want to understand if postmodernism refers to a historical period or if it's a cultural practice. Of the books written on this subject, this argument is one of the main divides in the debate over this definition. On the one hand, we have theorists like Frederick Jameson and David Harvey who treat postmodernism as a condition, and Jean Baudrillard and Jean-François Lyotard who define it as a philosophical state. This matters because it means that either postmodernism has a distinct timeline or it's a conceptual choice with an ambiguous beginning and an end. The second question, debated by the same theorists, is whether postmodernism is a critically productive movement or just a cynically empty gimmick. Jameson is postmodernism's harshest critic, so it's no surprise his opinion comes up a lot. We'll return to these questions as we identify each book on this list of easy postmodern novels, and we'll perhaps address whether or not they're dead. Our first novel comes from postmodern royalty, Thomas Pynchon. I believe it's his shortest book, The Crying of Lot 49. The story follows Oedipa Maas, who becomes entangled in her dead ex-boyfriend's estate. She partners with her ex's lawyer, Metzger, and the two seem to uncover a vast conspiracy involving a mysterious group called Cristero. They also come across a variety of other really oddball characters, like an inventor and a stamp collector, who seems deeply involved in the plot. As Maas and Metzger plunge deeper into the potential conspiracy, they uncover more and more clues that lead them to bigger questions and bigger problems. Will they uncover Tristero's involvement in her ex's estate before the crying of the elusive Lot 49 at auction? This is the book's central mystery. Pynchon's short novel is most known for its depiction of something called postmodern paranoia, which is really the concept that best characterizes his writing from Gravity's Rainbow up to his most recent work, Shadow Ticket. It involves characters who get into these intricate plots that may or may not be a construct of the main character's anxiety. These conspiracies are not hallucinations. Rather, they're facilitated by a culture in which signs and significant meaning is everywhere. So, in a media-saturated culture where everything holds significance, how does a modern person effectively navigate the world? Well, we don't, at least not through traditional means. Pynchon's paranoia questions the feasibility of what Jean-François Lyotard calls metanarratives to organize reality. In his theory, metanarratives are these big traditional stories that legitimize a society's values, knowledge, and governance. Think, for example, how the concept of progress is used to justify today's tech sector, or how the pursuit of freedom and liberty has rationalized wars. These organizing principles satisfy a need for order, but in Pynchon's postmodern logic, our pursuits for these unifying answers lead us not to answers, but to conspiracies without end. This brings us back to one of our original questions for this video. In the end, does Pynchon simply describe a world with too much meaning, or does his book actually map a productive means beyond it? Without giving the ending away, Crying Lot may offer both, but that depends on how you've navigated its postmodern condition. Another excellent primer for postmodern fiction is Don DeLillo's White Noise. It's a story about a family deeply rooted in middle class America. They are awash in consumerism, marketing power, and a deep but ambiguous fear of death. The father is a lead academic in the field of Hitler studies, and he's in a personal crisis. The family goes about their days concerned about their own personal problems. That is, until they're alerted to an airborne toxic event. How will this crisis finally break through the society's din of ambient media noise? Well, you'll have to read the book. The book has two primary elements of postmodernism. First is a concept called simulacrum, which describes a simulation or a referent with no seeming original precedent. Says Jean Baudrillard, simulacra proliferate in the contemporary media landscape. They produce meaning upon meaning upon meaning. This is the world in which White Noise's family live, a world like our own. In one instance, DeLillo describes one of my favorite examples of simulacrum and a really interesting example of postmodernism. The main character, Jack Gladney, travels with a friend to see the world's most photographed barn. When asked why it's the most photographed barn, he's told because it's the most photographed barn. The logic for its fame is circular without a seeming origination point for its celebrity. And the two men discuss how this status makes the barn almost impossible to really see. I know, contradictions. That's postmodernism. The airborne toxic event later becomes another simulacrum. It takes the shape of Jack's fears, but the cloud of his anxiety, its significance becomes almost impossible to comprehend or pinpoint. The novel's second major postmodern symbol is nostalgia, which is heavy in most of postmodern fiction. More than just a glossy representation of the past, DeLillo's novel indicates a hidden danger to nostalgia. Jack is an expert in Hitler studies, for example. But for people around him, this disturbing focus really raises no alarm. For that matter, Jack treats it with the same authority as other academic disciplines, but his studies have no insidious intent. Instead, their danger is in their mundanity and disconnect from historical memory. This kind of nostalgia, as noted by Jameson, drains history of meaning and it threatens to counteract the lessons learned from the past. Hitler is obviously a big lesson, but the world of White Noise has already forgotten it. Both nostalgia and simulacra address concerns over how we treat a culture's proliferation of signs with an uncritical eye towards things like consumerism, capital, money, and media. John Barth's Lost in the Funhouse takes us in a slightly different direction. Unlike the other texts on this list, it's a short story collection, but it's unified around a central question, and that is, and Barth is obsessed with this question, can fiction still do anything new? Have we already exhausted everything that can be done in fiction? In the titular story, a young man, Ambrose goes into a hall of mirrors with his brother and a girl named Magda, but he gets lost in the hall of mirrors. It's thin on plot, but that's not really the point. As the plot explores Ambrose's story, the narrator often interjects with commentary on the construction of its own fiction. He writes like this throughout his story. The beginning should recount the events between Ambrose's first sight of the funhouse early in the afternoon and his entering into it with Magda and Peter in the evening. The middle would narrate all relevant events from the time he goes in to the time he loses his way. Middles have the double and contradictory function of delaying the climax while at the same time preparing the reader for it and fetching him to it. And that's the way that he writes. He's commenting on the fiction as the story is going on. The story's purpose, therefore, is not the plot. The interjections and the creation of fiction are the point, and they take center stage in his narrative. Barth is doing one very important thing in the story. Theorist Linda Hutcheon describes what she calls postmodern fiction's productive function. Specifically, she describes a literary technique or a literary device called historiographic metafiction, which we'll discuss later, but more broadly, her ideas make a claim that diverges from Frederick Jameson's critique I mentioned earlier. Rather than viewing postmodernism as a cynically empty thing, Hutcheon sees its fiction as self-aware. In its capacity to be aware of its own creation, postmodern fiction affords authors the ability to critique their own narrative, even if it's ongoing. So, like Leotard said, postmodernism subverts metanarratives, these big organizing narratives, and self-reflexivity is a way this is accomplished. Through Barth commenting on his own story through metafictional techniques, he criticizes the assumptions and inherent values of the story, and indeed, fiction itself. Mumbo Jumbo by Ishmael Reed is yet another hallmark postmodern novel. The story follows an epidemic called Just Grew, which infects Black people with the euphoric urge to dance. The ancient Wallflower Order seeks to stop this so-called virus by training a talking android to infiltrate Black communities and convince people to adopt European Western culture. That's a lot of stuff, I know. The book's protagonist, Papa Labas, wants to thwart the Wallflower Order and help Just Grew spread. Whereas Just Grew is a pathology for the Wallflower Order, Papa Labas sees its possibility for evangelizing Black history and culture. Reed innovates by treating history as existing all together all at once. While a past is acknowledged, several out-of-time moments occur throughout the book. The Wallflower Orders, for example, Android, alludes to an Afrofuturist aesthetic, and the virus Just Grew is a trans-historical phenomenon that spans time since ancient Egypt. So everything is kind of out of time. And Reed's sense of time disrupts Western society's assertions that history is linear rather than continuous. While Reed leans into Frederick Jameson and David Harvey's complaint about postmodernism, that it's nonlinear and ahistorical, Reed counterintuitively deploys that very thing to great productive effect in a comment about history and history's telling. Rather than employing ahistorical artifacts as just mere nostalgia, in Mumbo Jumbo, pastness is a self-reflexive method to critique Western thought's view that history is a continuous line of progress. So, in this way, Reed's novel reflects Hutchins' idea of a historiographical metafiction as a political tool, primarily to comment on dominant historical narratives, that is, their values and the implicit assumptions in how we tell history. Through metafiction, Reed initiates possibilities of new histories and new futures from the oldest traditions. This is the very idea of those neo slave narratives that I discussed in another episode. William Gibson's Neuromancer was, at the time of publication in the 80s, a revelation for genre fiction. Although it has strong forebears in other science fiction, it was one of the first texts that showed that genre fiction could be literary and that literature could be cool. Main character Case is a former hacker who was previously burned out of his beloved cyberspace after a deal gone wrong. At the novel's start, he is invited on a heist by a shadowy figure who offers to cure him if he accepts. Of course, Case accepts, and he embarks on a high stakes mission that finds him going back into the Matrix with a rig that connects his nervous system directly within the digital world. This is how Gibson imagined this high stakes interface with the internet. And in fact, this is how people in this world interact with the web through implants, through direct mind connections. Case's happy reunion with cyberspace comes with a cost. He finds out that his mission is to merge two super AI entities and create an even more potentially dangerous consciousness. Gibson's views of future technology like AI and cyberspace, or predictions of globalization and tech bros, are prescient. But some of his assumptions about their functions are very bound to the late 70s and even early 80s. In this way, Neuromancer is very much a product of an era, which seems to affix its postmodernisms to a particular moment in history. And this is a common criticism of Neuromancer. It seems to reflect the very conditions it pessimistically portrays. And it doesn't seem to offer the sort of productive postmodernism of the other novels on this list. Take, for example, its depiction of cyberspace. The geography of this digital world lacks really a foundational landscape, and its proliferation of signs seems to closely depict what Baudrillard calls simulacra. In fact, this matrix is simulacra's material expression. Does Neuromancer offer readers a glimpse beyond its own pessimism? At the novel's close, Gibson offers several possibilities for interpretation. After you read it, what's your take? I probably don't need to do much introduction into Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. It's made its rounds on almost every popular form of media. And yes, it's even made its way into tabletop gaming and video games in the form of mods to popular franchises. No word yet on an off-road outfit for Fortnite. The story of this future America is told through character Offred's perspective. The Republic of Gilead is a new country, which arose from a theocratic rebellion that ended in the killing of the US president and most of Congress. In this new world, women are relegated to strict underclasses, and Offred is among a number of women designated handmaids. Her role as one of the limited number of fertile women in this world is to have babies for Gilead, and she's assigned to party dignitaries for this very duty. Her story is about her survival and her attempt to gain freedom from the Republic. Now, the word postmodernism doesn't necessarily jump to mind when thinking about this book, Nevertheless, it has a number of telltale signs of postmodern style, but not in the same playful way of Barth and Pynchon. First and foremost, The Handmaid's Tale is a sharp criticism of authoritarianism and the ideologies that make up what we now call Christian nationalism. In fact, its dystopian vision warns of creeping and powerful meta narratives that perhaps exist in some form at the time of the novel's publication. Atwood herself said when promoting a book called Oryx and Crake, and I paraphrase, I don't write about anything that hasn't already happened. The Handmaid's Tale also has a pretty faithful expression of Hutchins' historiographical metafiction. The book's historical notes and the epilogue, as well as Offred's past tense reporting, frame the book as an account of the past, our future, but her past. Because of this backward looking perspective, Offred is afforded the ability to reflexively comment on her story as it's delivered. Some readers have said that this subjective nature of Offred's historical account actually undermines the story's accuracy. But my actual impression was that it was always intended to strengthen its authenticity. Reading these firsthand accounts typically makes history more concrete for its readers, whereas quantitative data, dates, so on and so forth, statistics, they actually make history more abstract. And this, I think, is part of Atwood's point that Offred is given a voice, and her telling of history actually is meant to make it more concrete versus the abstract data that is often provided with a historic retelling. Regardless, both the novel's expression of meta narratives and metafiction enable possibilities for a productive feminist approach to postmodernism, which brings us again back to Hutchins' claims about historiographic metafiction. So, based on your examination of the last six novels, what would you say about postmodernism's lasting relevance? Is it still alive and operational? Or, as we asked at the top of this episode, has it been relegated to the dustbin of literary history? Some scholars, like Alan Kirby, have claimed that irony played a central function in postmodernism. And then eventually, with its collapse and a shift into our digital world, social media, etc., we've actually transitioned out of postmodernism. But let's delay our answers about this question a little bit longer. In order to determine our response to our last question about the collapse of irony and its centrality to postmodernism, let's take a look at two more novels that are often called postmodernism, but in reality, they show us a step or two beyond it. Okay, so in this instance, I'm not going to summarize the next two novels. I'm just going to jump right into the analysis. Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist employs many of the same devices as our six novels from earlier. But it foreshadows an attention to genre and detective noir in particular that goes beyond postmodernism's popular culture fusions. Instead, The Intuitionist doesn't just offer genre as a recreation or even a reproduction of popular culture, but it seems to give us a sincere position to discover new insight and meaning. Whitehead's novel forgoes postmodern irony in favor of a more sincere and even hopeful view of racial progress and historical recovery. Keep track of that word sincere. It's an important point of change after postmodernism. Next, Jennifer Egan published A Visit from the Goon Squad in 2011, which is another important point after postmodernism. If we note the collapse of postmodern irony as roughly 2000, or I think more specifically 2001, Egan's novel is a little over a decade beyond this death knell. In this way, Egan's novel feels like another transitional novel. Like The Intuitionist, it has elements of postmodernism, but really its ultimate treatment of the past is less flat and nostalgic and more emotionally rooted in a sincere expression of growth and maturity, despite or even because of its sometimes dark outcomes. It feels more like a sharp critique of nostalgia rather than a celebration of it. The novel's fragmentations and allusions to glory days of popular culture are an ode to postmodernism's core treasures. Aside from being an excellent book, Egan gives us a good sense of where and how all of these philosophies from postmodern fiction have changed, and perhaps even matured into a new sincerity. So, back to the original question: is postmodernism dead? Here's my take: yes and no. While its devices, styles, and ideas persist in more recent fiction, it's likely expired as a dominant cultural force. Its sense of irony and nostalgia are artifacts from an era in late capitalism that Jameson and Harvey mapped decades ago. And in more recent times, global events and even political movements have pretty much murdered the effectiveness of irony. But writers kept the postmodern tools. Metafiction and self reflexivity have stayed. But this brings us back to our earlier questions. Postmodernism was never just a historical period or really a cultural practice. It now persists in method and discourse, working through crises of meaning. When the crises shifted, the literary devices didn't disappear, they matured. The six novels, plus two more, show you those shifts. They define what it meant to be postmodern and how those ideas changed to reflect the needs of new crises and new revelations. The fiction being written now is in conversation with all of that stuff. Now, so are you. As promised, here's a list, a quick reminder of key claims about postmodernism. Because they come from different theorists, they have contradictions. Those contradictions have been included in this table to give you really a total sense of the conversation. We'll call this table Postmodernism Is. Thank you for listening. This has been Tilting at Tomes. I'm Ben.